My brother Chris was going to have a life-changing event this week. He was getting ready to tie the knot with his fiancée, April. Chris and April's relationship has flourished into something genuinely extraordinary in the little over 2 years that they've been together. Chris asked her to be his wife on a romantic getaway to Greece not long ago. His happiness was contagious when he returned, and it touched everyone here. It appeared like Chris and April would make a wonderful match, and the whole family was overjoyed for both of them. April was a truly wonderful person. As the wedding preparations progressed, it seemed as though the pieces were gradually fitting together. It seems that April's lifelong goal was to have a lavish, almost fairy tale-like wedding. Being the loyal companion that he is, Chris was prepared to help bring that vision to fruition. Nothing should have been less than ideal for her, in his opinion. It wasn't an easy task, but he accepted the challenge and paid for everything. Chris has worked hard for his position as vice president, and he has a fantastic career. Still, it takes a lot of work to plan a big wedding. However, Chris appeared unconcerned at all times. His dedication to satisfying April's every want was palpable. Naturally, the rest of the family was fully on board as well, lending our support and eagerly anticipating the celebration, fully aware that this wedding was going to be absolutely unforgettable. April invited me to lunch 2 months ago. I was completely taken aback when she asked me to be one of her bridesmaids. April and I hadn't had many opportunities to get to know one another closely since I had just returned home after living apart from my family for a few years. We hadn't seen one another much outside of family occasions when I was in town before this meal. Her invitation caught me off guard, so to speak. April told me that my brother would be overjoyed to see me up there with them, and that she thought I would be the perfect person to stand by her side on this momentous day with her closest friends. To set the scene, Chris and I are quite close. It was already a profound gesture, but I knew it would mean even more to him to have me stand at the altar. Her request was quite meaningful to me. By inviting me to the wedding, she seemed to be laying the groundwork for a deeper bond between us. So I went ahead and accepted the offer, on top of being a meaningful way to be there for my brother on his most important day. It seemed like a big step towards creating a better bond with April. I should probably explain why I went back to my hometown now. A poisonous and abusive relationship ended not long ago for me. I still can't get my head around the idea that my ex-boyfriend, who I loved and trusted, might change into someone completely different. Things appeared fine on the outside over the majority of my long-term relationship with my ex-boyfriend. It seemed like our relationship was stable. There were no major fights or disagreements. I believe that contributed to the difficulty of understanding what transpired thereafter. There was no slow accumulation, no warning indications. He was calm and collected, never one to lash out or be violent. Then, for no apparent reason, a terrible turn of events occurred. He started acting differently out of the blue. I felt like I was abruptly sharing my home with an alien when he went violent in ways I had never witnessed before. When he became furious, he would start yelling at me or even get near to my face, even over little issues. A shadowy side to him emerged out of nowhere, and it frightened me. Things took a turn for the worst one night. As usual, we were simply chilling out in front of the TV, watching Netflix. In a casual tone, we were discussing potential next movie viewing options. Nothing deep or controversial, just the typical inane chat between partners. That's why the subsequent events were so unexpected and tragic. Without any provocation, he turned to me, and before I could even process what was happening, he slapped me across the face. The force of it took me completely by surprise. It was as if I had been pulled out of reality, and for a split second, I couldn't comprehend what had just occurred. My cheek stung with a searing pain that spread through my face, and almost immediately, tears welled up in my eyes, not just from the physical pain, but from the overwhelming emotional shock. What disturbed me even more was the look on his face. He didn't seem to care. There was no remorse, no sign of regret. He was completely nonchalant, as if he had done something perfectly normal. Then in a cold and emotionless tone, he told me that I should never argue with him again about which movie to watch. His tone implied that I had somehow deserved what had just happened because I had dared to express a preference for a movie. He then picked a film of his choosing and continued to watch as if nothing had happened, leaving me stunned, hurt, and confused. For the first time, I felt like the person sitting next to me might be a monster. That night marked the end of whatever relationship we once had, and it was clear I needed to get out. This wasn't a person I could trust or feel safe with anymore. It wasn't just a slap. It was the complete lack of humanity in his reaction, the way he thought it was acceptable to control me with violence. Once the initial shock wore off, I got up from the couch without saying a word and headed upstairs. The adrenaline kicked in, and all I could think about was getting out. I grabbed my bags and started to pack. As I was packing, I could hear him shouting after me, telling me I was overreacting, calling me weak for not being able to handle one slap. He was taunting me that even though I went to the gym, I was still not strong enough. His words cut deeper than the physical pain. I couldn't believe how insensitive and dismissive he was being and how little he understood or cared about the damage he had just done. The fact that he was trying to justify what happened, minimizing his actions, and making it seem like I was in the wrong for wanting to leave made it all the more terrifying. This wasn't the man I thought I knew, and I realized that staying any longer could only lead to more harm. I needed to remove myself from that situation immediately, so I walked out without saying a word to him as I didn't want to escalate things further. For the next few days, I stayed at a hotel, trying to figure out what to do next. On one hand, I was devastated. This was someone I had been with for a long time. We had built a life together, and his family had become like my own. But on the other hand, I knew I had made the right decision to leave. There was no going back after what had happened, no way to undo the damage or trust him again. When his parents found out what had happened, they reached out to me. I knew they would eventually. After all, they had always considered me a part of their family, and it wasn't like me to just disappear without explanation. When they called, I told them everything. I didn't hold back about how his behavior had changed so drastically in recent months, how he had become more aggressive and controlling, and of course, how it all culminated in that night when he hit me. To my relief, they were concerned too. They almost couldn't believe what I was telling them, and like me, they struggled to reconcile this version of him with the son they knew. They agreed that this wasn't like him at all, and they acknowledged how serious the situation had become. I think it was hard for them to hear, but at least they didn't try to defend his actions or dismiss my experience. That gave me some comfort, knowing that I wasn't alone in recognizing how wrong his behavior was. Everyone who knew him, including his own family, would have said the same thing. This wasn't the person we knew, and something had clearly gone very wrong. That week, his parents visited him, and they also noticed something was seriously off. It was the way he was acting in general, irritable and out of character. Alarmed by what they saw, they decided to take him to the hospital to get him checked out. It was during that visit that they discovered he had a Bridezilla tumor. The news was shocking, to say the least. Suddenly, everything that had happened, all his strange behavior, the aggression, and the sudden shift in his personality, started to make sense. It wasn't that he had become abusive out of nowhere. He had a personality shift because he was dealing with something far beyond his control. The tumor was affecting his behavior in ways none of us could have predicted. When I found out, I was deeply relieved. It meant that the person I had cared for, the person I thought I knew, hadn't suddenly turned into an abuser. His actions were the result of a medical condition that neither of us had known about. I started to feel incredibly guilty for leaving the way I did, even though I had no way of knowing what was really going on at the time. Of course, despite this revelation, it didn't change the fact that things between us had already fallen apart. We both met after his checkup and agreed that it was best for us to go our separate ways. The tumor explained his actions, but it didn't erase what had happened. and I still resented how he had slapped me that night. There was too much hurt, confusion, and fear still lingering, and it wasn't something we could simply move past. So we made the difficult decision to break up. It was heartbreaking. I had spent so much time with him, and despite everything, I still cared about him deeply. After the breakup, I felt completely lost. It was a lot to process. The trauma of what had happened, the guilt of leaving, and the grief of ending a long-term relationship that I thought would last. That's when I decided to move back home. I needed a fresh start, a change of scenery, and the support of my family to help me heal. This backstory about my ex is essential because it explains a lot about why April started to resent me after she found out about my past relationship. You see, my whole family knows the details of what I went through, and they've been nothing but supportive. They understand how impossible that situation was and why I had no choice but to leave. No one has ever blamed me for walking away from my ex, especially given the circumstances. However, when April found out about what happened, she had a very different reaction. April is quite religious, and her views about relationships and commitments stem heavily from her faith. Whenever we get together for any family event leading up to her wedding, whether it was lunch or some casual outing, April would make backhanded comments here and there that left me feeling judged and upset. She made it clear that she thought I had made the wrong decision by leaving my ex. According to her, it was wrong to abandon a partner during difficult times, regardless of the circumstances. She would talk about how people who leave their loved ones in such situations end up with bad karma. Naturally, this would infuriate me. I was already dealing with my own guilt and heartbreak, trying to come to terms with the fact that I had left someone who was dealing with a serious medical condition, even though his behavior had become abusive. It wasn't like I walked away easily. It was a decision I agonized over. But at the same time, I knew I hadn't been married to my ex, so I had no obligations, and I shouldn't have been expected to stay in a relationship that had turned toxic, especially when his mood swings and aggression were endangering my well-being. Still, April's comments would dig at me, making me feel worse about an already painful situation. I confided in my brother about how much April's remarks bothered me. My brother, though, would try to defend her, explaining that April's upbringing was a bit different than ours and that she had always been taught to stick it out in relationships. Hence, she felt the way she did. He would urge me not to take her comments too personally, telling me that she wasn't trying to be hurtful. He meant well, but it didn't make things any easier for me. Every time I saw April, I braced myself for some new comment that would make me feel like I was being judged for a decision that I already struggled with. Things took a frustrating turn when April and my brother sent out wedding invitations to everyone. She had graciously given everyone a +1, which I appreciated, but I sent back my RSVP indicating that it would just be me attending. I wasn't bringing anyone as I was still recovering from my breakup and wasn't in any place to have someone new in my life. To my surprise, April began insisting that I should invite my ex to the wedding. I scoffed at the idea and told her plainly that this was impossible. I hadn't even spoken to him since the breakup, and the idea of inviting him to my brother's wedding of all places made no sense whatsoever. I was just beginning to heal, and bringing him into such an intimate family event felt wrong on every level. But April didn't seem to understand that. She kept pushing the idea, repeating how it would be a good gesture and I should let bygones be bygones. She insisted that he must be suffering after I left him and that I should at least invite him to have a good time at their wedding. It felt like she wasn't even trying to understand my feelings about the situation. Normally, I would just nod along and try to ignore her comments, like my brother had told me, just to keep the peace. But as you can understand, I was starting to get very irritated by her. There was one occasion where she again crossed the line. We were all out for lunch. April had invited her entire bridesmaid squad, and we were discussing dresses and other wedding details, trying to enjoy the fun and excitement that comes with wedding planning. But of course, April found a way to steer the conversation back to my ex in front of everyone. She brought up the situation again and started telling the other girls how I'd been mean for breaking up with that poor fellow after he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She framed it like I was some heartless woman who had walked out on him in his hardest time. I could feel the tension rise in the air as she continued to paint me as the villain in front of the other bridesmaids. It was humiliating and infuriating. Here we were in a supposedly lighthearted setting, talking about dresses and wedding plans, and she was dragging up my most painful personal experience as if it was some casual gossip. The whole thing felt completely inappropriate, and I struggled to keep my composure as the other girls exchanged awkward glances. These girls, April's childhood friends who were going to be her bridesmaids, seemed to share her beliefs and values, likely influenced by their similar religious upbringings. They jumped on the bandwagon and started to bombard me with questions about my ex and our past relationship. Their questioning became relentless, and I could feel my patience slipping away. At that moment, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about my ex anymore. This was about April's inability to respect my choices and boundaries. Without holding back, I asked April outright what her problem was with me. I demanded to know why she was so obsessed with my breakup and my ex. I had never confronted her directly before, so she was visibly taken aback at first. I could see the shock in her expression. She didn't expect me to question her like this, especially not in front of her friends. Finally, she sputtered out an explanation that left me both shocked and furious. April said that now that she was marrying into our family, she felt that if I could give up so easily on my partner, it reflected poorly not only on my upbringing, but ultimately on my brother too. She continued to say how my brother had always told her about my relationship with my ex over the years, and hearing that I left such a long-term relationship without giving it any careful thought reflected negatively on my character, and by extension, on my family and my brother. Her words were like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. April somehow felt entitled to tell me what I should have done in a situation that she knew only bits and pieces of. The nerve of her to think that my personal choices had anything to do with her relationship with my brother. I was livid. I firmly told her that my relationship with my ex was none of her business, and it never had been. I pointed out that my decisions in life had nothing to do with my family or my brother. I was done letting her cross that line and made it crystal clear that she needed to respect my boundaries by never bringing this up again. The atmosphere at the table grew tense, and I could feel the awkwardness settle over the group. I didn't want to stay there a minute longer and simply left. I had finally said what I needed to say anyway. Since that heated conversation with April, things between us only got worse. She never apologized to me, and neither did I. Every time I thought we might be able to move past it, she found new ways to take out her frustration on me. It started with her nitpicking about my bridesmaid dress. April approved everyone else's dresses without any issue, but when it came to mine, she kept changing her mind. I had to reorder my dress 4 times, each one in line with the wedding theme, yet none seemed to satisfy her. It became clear that this wasn't about the dress. It was about making my life difficult because of the tension between us. I didn't want to start another fight, so I went along with the changes, hoping it would end there. But of course it didn't. After the dress ordeal, she found something new to criticize, this time about my appearance. She flat out told me that I needed to get a fake tan before the wedding. I was stunned. I've never had a fake tan in my life and had no intention of starting now, especially not for someone else's wedding. April explained that because of my naturally fair complexion, I stood out the most among her bridesmaids, and she wanted me to tone it down so I wouldn't stand out in the wedding photos. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was offensive on so many levels. Being told that my skin tone didn't fit her vision was insulting and hurtful. I firmly told her that there was no way I would be getting a fake tan just to blend in for her pictures. I even offered to stay out of the photos if it bothered her that much, but I wasn't going to change my appearance for her wedding. The next issue that arose was that April wanted all of her bridesmaids to plan an extravagant bachelorette party for her. On its own, that wasn't unreasonable, but her expectations were wildly unrealistic. She insisted that we all contribute hundreds of dollars so that we could fly her to an expensive, all-inclusive resort. It was a huge financial ask, and I wasn't the only one who found it over the top. Another bridesmaid also protested against the high cost, pointing out that it wasn't feasible for everyone. As usual, April took offense. She scolded me and the other girl during a recent lunch, accusing us of not being good bridesmaids because we weren't willing to spend that kind of money on her. She told us how this was our duty since we were part of her squad, and that we shouldn't even be questioning it. It felt like nothing we did was ever going to be enough for her. She kept insisting we have this lavish party, but I had finally had enough. I put my foot down and outright refused to cave to her unreasonable demands. I told her that while I was willing to spend money by throwing her a good party, I wasn't going to go broke by shelling out hundreds of dollars just to make her happy. That seemed to be the final straw for April. In a fit of rage, she started yelling at me in front of her friends, and then she disinvited me from my own brother's wedding. She told me that if I wasn't willing to spend money on her, it meant that I didn't respect her as my brother's future wife. She continued to say that there was no room for ill-wishers like me on their special day, and therefore she didn't want me at her wedding anymore. I was floored. It was unbelievable to me that she would go to such lengths over something so petty to completely exclude me from my brother's big day. It wasn't just a personal slight anymore. She was actively trying to cut me out of one of the most important moments in our family's life. I was hurt, angry, and frustrated beyond words. April had gone from making passive-aggressive comments to trying to humiliate me, to now outright banning me from my brother's wedding, all because I wouldn't bow to her ridiculous demands. I wanted to argue with her further, but I reminded myself that my brother loved her, and I didn't want to make things difficult for him. So I told her, "Fine, I won't attend your wedding. I hope you have a great time with my brother and the rest of my family." April just ignored me and asked me to leave, so I left. I had accepted things for what they were, even though I wanted to fight with her. However, when my brother found out from the rest of my family that April had uninvited me, he was understandably upset. He called me to ask for an explanation, and I told him everything that had happened between us. After that, I'm not sure exactly what transpired between April and my brother, but he seemed to have confronted her about it privately. I guess things must not have gone well, because this week, my brother announced to me and the rest of our family that the wedding was off. We were in shock. He was refusing to marry her altogether. Now I feel terrible because my family kind of blames me for this outcome. They're saying it's my fault for refusing to make minor adjustments for April. They believe that by refusing to compromise on certain things, I might have contributed to the tension that led to their fallout. It's frustrating because, from my perspective, April had been treating me poorly for months, and I don't feel like those issues were minor at all. But in their eyes, they think a little more flexibility on my part could have prevented this entire situation. Update 1. To clarify, my family is supportive of me and understands that April has been hard on me for months. However, they do feel that I could have handled things differently, like giving in to basically all her demands. They think that because my brother is so protective of me, he might have reacted a little too harshly toward April, which might have contributed to the cancellation of the wedding. It doesn't help that April's family has been reaching out to us and blaming me too for the fiasco. I plan on sitting down with my brother and having a more detailed discussion to understand where his mind is at. Update 2. It has been a few weeks now since my brother announced that he was canceling his wedding to April, and the reality of the situation has begun to sink in. It feels surreal to think about how quickly everything has changed. In the beginning, I was hopeful that things would resolve themselves and that my brother would find a way to reconcile with April. But as the days turned into weeks, it became increasingly clear that their relationship was beyond repair, and he wanted nothing to do with her anymore. I had to talk to my brother about why he suddenly called off the wedding. It turns out that April said a lot more nasty things about me and our parents during their fight. My brother confessed that April had always exhibited some controlling behavior toward him in the past, but he had always sort of brushed it off. However, after he heard from me that she had been bullying me for months with her relentless demands, her need to control every detail of the wedding, and her utter disregard for my feelings, he realized that she was actually a very mean person who refused to ever hold herself accountable. Somehow, she always acted like she was superior to others because of her beliefs, and he felt this was something he couldn't just ignore any longer. So he walked out of their relationship. Meanwhile, April has continued to text me and leave multiple voicemails, accusing me of ruining her future. She threatens to punish me for my bad deeds and basically yells at me in the voicemails. Now that I know my brother would never reconcile with her, I'm considering blocking her. Version 3. A couple of months have passed since my brother called off his wedding. Even though they first held me responsible, our parents have since moved on from the issue. They originally assumed I was being dramatic or that I was adding fuel to the fire between my brother and April. Their opinion of April shifted dramatically after I sat them down and had them listen to her voicemails and read the sequence of texts she sent before I chose to block her. It was shocking to them since they couldn't believe that this sweet, soft-spoken girl could be secretly so vicious and spiteful. It goes without saying that they no longer approve of her and are pleased by my brother's choice. After that, they started to really care about my brother's emotions and his happiness, which is more important to them than any wedding planning. Actually, they're relieved that he chose to end relations with someone who obviously held such negativity. They're not merely supportive of him anymore. At the same time, my brother is thriving. Although he occasionally longs for April, he believes that his actions were eventually beneficial. He now realizes that being together would have only brought them more pain and arguments down the road. I am thankful that this entire ordeal did not break the strong link that my brother and I have maintained, as it always has been.